We're going through a series at the moment on the Song of Songs, and the purpose for this series is to link in with the teaching we're giving to our children and young people about relationships, but also because we recognize that over the recent decades, the church has lost its voice, and perhaps we've lost our confidence or even our understanding as to why God's purposes for sexual relationships are as they are in Scripture. Do they hold firm for today? If they hold firm today, which we firmly believe they do, how do we understand them and how do we live as Christian people within our world today? And that's quite a challenge. And so we've been using the Song of Songs to help us understand and explore that, to open up some conversations, primarily because we really want to be able to equip the whole church. It may well be that for some of us our experiences haven't been those which fit in with the biblical pattern. We become Christians later in life. How does that fit? How do we feel? How do we react? It may be that we are Christians or were Christians and we behaved in a way which didn't fit God's blueprint. Does that mean to say things can't be changed? Of course not. But what does that right relationship look like? So is the screen working? I can see it backwards. It seems to be, it's all right. Yep, okay. If you've got Bibles, it would be really helpful to have those in front of you. Not too long a passage today. We're going from chapter 3, verse 6, and we're going through to chapter 5 and verse 1. And we're into the wedding scene, the wedding of these two lovers. And I think it's very clear, as we mentioned last week, this woman, as they've fallen in love, are not yet living together. They're separate. There's no sexual relationship happened. But they've talked about it. It's been part of their language. And actually, last week we saw how important communication and learning the language of love and expressing that is within the song. So we have a duet, primarily, of the man who's called the lover, talking to the beloved, who's the woman. But they're not just singing to themselves. This is a public song. We have people who take part, like the friends. We have parts and characters, like the watchman in the city that we've seen taking an active role. So this isn't a private love song. This is a song which is being sung, declaring the wonders and the beauty of relationship within the context of the whole congregation or whole people that are hearing. And that would have included those who were widowed, those who haven't yet got a marriage relationship. It may well have included those who long for it but didn't have that opportunity. The whole gamut of society, the old, the young, it is a corporate song. And so actually people have said, is this really right for Sunday morning stuff? And I think absolutely right for Sunday morning. This isn't something that the Bible hides away, but actually it's almost at the center of our scriptures. And what we see today is that coming together of physical unity comes right at the center of the Song of Songs. So it's not something that we hide away from. In fact, if we hide away from it, we cause problems. And maybe that's been the difficulty for the church over the centuries. Never been quite sure how to bring this basic core relationship, these strong feelings and emotions that we grow up with and confuse us. How do we bring that together with spirituality? And for many of us, we've grown with that part of my life isn't where God exists. And yet we know that God created it for a purpose, for our blessing and for our good, not just for the procreation of children, but for our enjoyment, as the bedrock of relationship within society. So this song explores that relationship. And it's more about words than it is about action. And that's what we discovered last week. Learning the language of emotional connectivity is absolutely vital in the build-up of this relationship. And maybe that's why us guys struggle. I guys struggle with poetry and emotional stuff because we think that's not really us. I'd rather get the club, grab the woman by the hair and into the cave. Bash. But it doesn't do much for you women folk, does it? And what we see in this wedding scene, actually, is more words. And the focus of the singing is the man. So guys, you're in for it this morning. You need to have your ears pinned back. We're talking primarily to you. And women, enjoy this. Because actually what we're looking at is what we hope we as men could be, that actually you just long to have a relationship with us. So let's read. Chapter 3. Ooh, don't think we're working. Okay. Here we go. The lovers' procession. Now, generally speaking, when we have weddings here in church, who's done all the organizing? The bride. Many a bridegroom that I've talked to in the preparation says, yep, that's hers. I'll turn up. All I need to do is put a new suit on, have a nice new pair of shoes, and I turn up at church. She can deal with the rest of it. If you've got a daughter who's been married, you may have gone through that experience of, wow, it can be hard work. Totally the opposite here. We see actually it's the guy that is doing all the preparation. So chapter 3, verse 6. Who is this coming up from the desert like a column of smoke perfumed with myrrh and incense made from all the spices of the merchant? Look! It is Solomon's carriage, escorted by 60 warriors, the noblest of Israel. All of them wearing the sword, all experienced in battle, each with his sword at his side, prepared for the terrors of the night. King Solomon made for himself the carriage. He made it of wood from Lebanon. Its posts he made of silver, its base of gold. Its seat was upholstered with purple, its interior lovingly inlaid by the daughters of Jerusalem. Come out, you daughters of Jerusalem, and look at King Solomon wearing the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day his heart rejoiced. So we get the picture here. We see the guy, King Solomon, coming up out from the desert. And we see a lot in this song about desert and gardens. The desert, a place where things can't grow. The garden, a place which is cultivated where fruitfulness happens. So a lovely picture here of the wonder of actually two people coming together is something that's going to be fruitful. Coming up from the desert like a column of smoke perfumed with myrrh and incense made from all the spices of the merchant. Column of smoke and incense? Is it here that we begin to see something of the connection between this wedding day and the relationship that God has with his people? That sense in which from Exodus, as God came and gave the law and helped that relationship, this is how you live with me, people. There was great clouds of smoke. There was a sense of great awe and splendor as God came and met with his people. And it was God who came down and met with Moses. Moses went up to the mountain to meet with God, and there was all that tremendous cataclysmic thunder and lightning and cloud, and nobody could go anywhere near the base of the mountain because of the holiness of God. Maybe this is a bit of a picture here that's coming, that weaves that which is most intimate for us alongside that which is most intimate for us with God. Here is someone who is prepared, who's ready, who comes, who meets, who joins with us. And where does he come? He comes with 60 armed warriors. And it's Solomon. Now, we know, looking back, that Solomon isn't perhaps the best model for marriage relationships. But maybe this is a picture of Solomon and is used because he was given that wisdom for living. He asked God for wisdom to be able to lead his people right. So maybe there's that sense here in which actually the linking together with Solomon, this is how relationships are best worked out. Here's the wisdom that's there. And it's a wisdom that's protected. So actually, guys, how well do we surround ourselves with warriors? This is gang culture, isn't it? And actually, there's a lot to be said with gang culture. There's a framework, there's a support, there's a commitment, there's a loyalty. Now, the outworking of gang culture may not be in the way we would want, but there's much within that that is good. Do you have friends? Do you have 60 armed warriors around you? Because let's face it, for us guys, we really struggle to have friendships. We like to be independent. We struggle with that sense of community. So as we grow up, as we develop, are we encouraging our youngsters? Are we looking ourselves to develop that relationship that we are surrounded and protected by those who are for us? 60 armed warriors. The noblest of Israel, wearing the sword, all experienced in battle. These are, perhaps, those sort of people who have been through it, who understand, who can come alongside and provide that protection. So as we see the lover coming, his work of preparation has been ongoing before there's that sexual intimacy with the one who is his beloved. Prepared for the terrors of the night. And perhaps one of the challenges that we've got as guys is we don't really know how to relate at an emotional level. If we want to reach guys and we do things together. And that's good, isn't it? There's nothing better than doing a job together. But it's a bit easier to talk about things than to talk about what's inside. And often, perhaps, because we would rather hide those things that are inside because they're painful and difficult. In the same way that the woman in chapter 1, verse 7 says, "Dark am I, yet lovely." She recognized that things have been bad. Women are so much more easy and open and share that. That actually, as guys, we don't do the communication bit very well. And maybe that's part of the reason why over the centuries the church has struggled with this whole area of sexuality. Because it's predominantly been men who've taught it. 60 armed warriors. But it's not just that. He's been busy preparing his carriage. Now, is there a picture here that not only links with that which God did in the Exodus, but also that which Jesus will do when he comes, as we read about in Revelation, as we had a couple of years ago now, I think, looking at Revelation, the white rider on the horse coming to claim his bride. Again, linking that which is most intimate and personal for us with that which actually connects us with the divine. That one day the bridegroom will come and the bride will be prepared. Some wonderful imagery picking up here, isn't there? That we see and we find vaguely disturbing because it links together things which we would rather keep separate. You know, in the wedding service, after it's all happened, those person who's doing the ceremony turns around, let he whom God has joined together, let no man rent asunder. That's because I'm old-fashioned. Yeah. In other words, they're together. I wonder if actually within the framework of that pronouncement and within the expectation of what's going to take place within that God-blessed union is a sense in which we do not, and we are commanded not to separate that which is spiritual with that which is physical. The two are combined. And maybe in God's goodness they are there to help us to understand what it is to develop a relationship with God through the exercise of that which is purely and simply physical and human. That's something to think about, perhaps, and talk about. So he's coming up out of the desert. And that's a wonderful picture, isn't it? Awful picture. Where it's hard to live. We need to recognize that actually there is a desert world that we live in. That it is hard for our folk who grow up, whose wives perhaps have passed away, or whose husbands have passed away, who haven't yet found that relationship that they long for. Or maybe even those who are in a relationship and yet it's like a desert. And within this song, there's the encouragement, actually come. There's some preparation work. There's some connectivity to be done. To get to the garden. Adam and Eve created in that wonderful garden where there was no sin, and we come to a city when Jesus returns. But there is no hardship. But as he prepares, he creates this carriage for himself. Quite something, isn't it? Here's the king, yet he's down in the carpenter's shop. He doesn't get somebody to make it for him. He is the one who's taking responsibility for building the carriage which will carry him to that place. I think there's a wonderful imagery there. Actually, there's some work to be done. I'm going to have some people around me. I'm going to develop friendships. I'm going to provide support. I'm going to learn that connectivity between one another. But I'm also going to work on that which will carry me to a place where that intimacy can be enjoyed. I wonder if that's a picture of us developing that character. That character which is solid and secure, which is valuable, silver and gold, all that's best. But it's not something that is done on his own. It's also done in community. He brings in these daughters of Jerusalem, perhaps because he's not very good at needlework. I don't know. Lovingly inlaid, upholstered with purple. But that sense in which, again, it isn't just the armed warriors, but there's a community around him of people. Because how do we learn to relate with women unless we actually connect with them? That's actually a training ground. And I think church is a wonderful training ground for developing relationships across the sexes and across the ages. I remember talking to somebody up in Stockport who grew up in church. And she said to me afterwards, church has been a wonderful, wonderful thing to put on my CV. Because I know how to connect and talk to old people. And I know how to connect and talk to these people and to that people and to a cross-section of society. That's one of the wonderful gifts that God has given to us. We're all nuts. But let's face it, there's a world out there full of nuts, and we learn to get on with nuts. Might need some nutcrackers. But here we see a community taking place. And actually that which prepares us physically for sexual relationships is the community around us. And this little passage perhaps explores that. It's public. It's family. It's in community involvement in this wedding day. Now we have that, don't we? But do we have it in terms of not just the preparation of the food and the seating plan and the service order, but in terms of the character of the couple that are coming together, that we engage and we help and we look to build into one another and we encourage these guys, hey, you've got to get this together, guys. Because if this is going to be this committed, loving, lasting relationship, we want to be there to support that, and there's a few things that need to be changed and prepared. Who is it that gives Solomon his crown? It's his mother. When you're crowned, it's like an inauguration, isn't it? One day, probably in the not too distant future, King Charles will be crowned King of England. I'm not sure if that's treasonable to say that while the Queen is still alive. But until the point comes, he is not king. Here, the work of preparation that Solomon or this man has done is recognized by his mother. Now, I never asked my mum if she thought I was ready to get married. I think she thought I was far too young at 22. Far too immature. But she was probably desperate to get me out of the house, so she was happy for me to get married. But that community recognition that actually, you're working at it. You're getting there. And here's the crown. The crown that's there on the day of his wedding, the day his heart rejoiced. So if you're not married yet, what preparations are you putting in place? Maybe you think, actually, I'll never get married. There's still a work to be done to come alongside, to build that relationship, to build those friends, which for us as guys makes life work. Helps us to protect against those things which are unhealthy and unhelpful in the area of sexuality. By having friends who are there to support and encourage, to help us to learn that language of emotional connectivity that is so vital, as we'll see in a short while. He prepares himself. And then they meet. Come up out of the desert, his wonderful carriage, he's got his crown on his head, and he sees his bride. Yeah? What does he do? Well, let's read it. 4:1-7. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. And now we get into some language which perhaps we need to translate, but let's read it as it is, because you may want to talk to your beloved in this way. Your hair is your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn. Coming up from the washing, each has its twin, not one of them is alone. In other words, she doesn't have any dentures. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veils are like the halves of a pomegranate. Great. Your neck is like the Tower of David built with elegance. On it hangs 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Your two breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lily. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. All beautiful you are, my darling. There is no flaw in you. I wonder if we were to ask our bridegrooms to describe publicly the beauty of their bride, whether we would be tongue-tied or eloquent. Most bridegrooms that I have had occasion to marry have the greatest asset is knocking knees. They just about can manage to get the vows out. But here's a language being expressed. And it's not between the two of them. This is being done publicly. It's almost as if he's saying, look, I've learnt the language of love and I'm going to be describing and showing it. And I do that publicly. It's a head-to-toe exploration of the beauty of her body. And it uses 7th century pictures of beauty which don't really apply too well today. So pomegranates, okay. Flocks of sheep, okay. But the picture is of one of, actually you are beautiful. Do you ladies good to be described as beautiful? I think it does. I'm not a lady, and I can't say I'm the best at expressing this. But here's a Song of Songs. The picture of actually that best of emotional link. He praises her beauty. And his desire, well, it's for the person. It's not her body, it's her. You're perfect. You're beautiful. There's no flaw in you. Now, is that true? No. We'll see in a couple of weeks' time. You get a week off next week, so we'll come back to this in a couple of weeks' time. It's not that she is perfect, but in his eyes she is. Isn't that a wonderful picture of how God sees us? He loves us as we are. He sees what we can be, not what we were. A mirror, perhaps, of something that's linked in here of God's goodness to us. And then in verses 8 to 15, we have an invitation that the guy gives to his wife. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Descend from the crests of Amana, from the top of Senir, the summit of Hermon, from the lions' dens, and the mountain haunts of the leopards. You've stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You've stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume than any spice. Your lips drop sweetness as the honeycomb, my bride. Milk and honey are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like that of Lebanon. You're a garden, locked up, my sister, my bride. You're a spring, enclosed a sealed fountain. Your plants are an orchard of pomegranates with choice fruits, with henna and nard and saffron, calmus and cinnamon, with every kind of incense tree, with myrrh and aloes, and all the finest spices. You are a garden fountain, a well of flowing water streaming down from Lebanon. Captivated, prepared, he invites her. He says, come with me. An invitation, because why? She's stolen his heart. And several times in verses 9, I think he talks about my heart. You've stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. You've stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes. There's an emotional connection here that he wants to express, and he is expressing it publicly with an eloquence and a poetic nature that makes this the Song of Songs. Something to lift up and to hold. And as he begins to think about the wedding night and the consummation that's going to take place, there's an anticipation that includes all the senses, because we are physical beings. He talks about touch and smell and sense of wonder of what's coming up and what's going to be. So your lips drop with sweetness. Milk and honey are under your tongue. Very intimate, but poetically beautiful language that is no way erotic or difficult for us to read, but a picture of something that is absolutely wonderful, and he is anticipating and looking forward. But we need to recognize that what he is looking forward to is being waited for. That God's blueprint for marriage is a key part of developing that maturity and that connectivity, so that husband and wife, when they come together, can do so not simply as a physical act, but as a physical and an emotional act. That there's a connectivity that has been worked and done and fought for as the relationship develops. Why do I say that? Well, I think in verse 12, there's a picture here of chastity or celebration of the fact that the wife, the beloved, and the lover are virgins. You're a garden locked up. So in other words, it hasn't yet been opened up. My sister, my bride, you're a spring enclosed, a sealed fountain. God's blueprint for marriage is very clear. We have it in Genesis. It is one man, one woman, united together as one flesh. Marriage is purely and simply within God's blueprint for man and woman. But it is so protected within Scripture for a purpose and a reason that the penalty for sex outside of marriage, for adultery within marriage, is really severe. So it is for a number of other things that people get up to. For false witness, for lying, for stealing. And it could be that we say, well, okay, all those acts of vengeance or judgment that includes stoning of the adulterer, the death of the thief, the death of the fornicator, changed when Jesus came. But Jesus actually didn't do away, he fulfilled the law. And in Matthew we read, he says, actually, if you look lustfully at a woman, you committed adultery. If you have anger in your heart, it's as if you've murdered them. There is a greater expectation of what is important. Now, I know that as we proclaim that, as we teach that, it goes right against where society is at today. But we need perhaps not just to preach and teach that this is God's way, but why is it God's way? Why is God got these protections around this basic core relationship and core physical thing that happens between man and woman that needs that protection? And I think because if we get the order wrong, the relationships are going to be far, far more difficult to maintain. if we do not as men learn that emotional connectivity, our women can feel used. And that core relationship of love and support and mutuality can quickly become dry. And that which is wonderful and beautiful becomes like a desert. And we have here in this song, as the man comes to claim his bride, as he invites her, a demonstration publicly that actually, okay, physically, he can make love to his wife, but actually emotionally he is qualified to be able to go into that commitment, and it is recognized and seen by the community around. It's where I think it ties in with the crown from his mother. Doesn't mean to say that everything's going to be great from then on. We'll see next couple of weeks' time it isn't. But he sees in his bride, as they think of unlocking the garden of that relationship becoming husband and wife becoming one, he talks of her in verse 15 as a garden fountain, a well of flowing water streaming down from Lebanon. Now, in that part of the world, that's life. That's fruitfulness. That's the opportunity. Now, I don't suppose it's a great idea to turn to your bride on wedding night and say, "You're a garden fountain, my dear." But that's the picture. And maybe there's something there that connects too with that relationship that we have with God, that as we allow Jesus into our hearts and lives, as we recognize that He is the one who provides us the fruitfulness in our lives and our relationships and everything, that without that our lives are like deserts. In the same way as our sexual relationships without that emotional connectivity can be like a desert. It points us to something which is far deeper. And that's quite shocking for us. And then in verse 16 and chapter 5, verse 1, we come to the midpoint of the song. In the Hebrew, there are, I can't remember it is, 244 verses, and this is verse 122. Right at the center. Not at the beginning, not at the end. There's a relationship that's going to be continued on. And I think that again picks and points us to the importance of actually being celibate and being chaste and being pure in our relationships with the opposite sex until we are ready and it is publicly acknowledged. Because that is for our best, and that's the better story. It's not the story our bodies tell us, but it's a story that our faith tells us. So we have a choice, don't we? Do I trust God sufficiently to live life His way? Am I willing to control my God-given emotions and physical reactions that take place, which are so strong, to bring them under control? Because I know God loves me and God has given me His best. I seek to find it. And in very poetic and lovely language, we read them talking about the invitation and the sexual experience that comes as they enjoy their wedding night. Awake, north wind, and come, south wind, blow on my garden that its fragrance may spread abroad. Let my lover come into his garden and taste its choice fruits. And then the lover in verse 5, chapter 1, I have come into my garden My sister, my bride, I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I've eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I've drunk my wine and my milk. I have come, gathered, eaten, drunk. Poetic language which reflects that most beautiful and intimate of relationships that man and woman can have. As under God, they become one. And what do the friends do? Well, they're there. That's a bit, wow, dear me, can't cope with that. But they're encouraging. Eat, O friends, and drink. Drink your fill, O lovers. This is good. This is right. Enjoy. Take time. Why has God made us sexual beings? Because we all are. Whether we be 15 or 95. We are sexual beings. Why has He made us and created us so that there is that chemical spark within our brains that causes a physical reaction in the way that it does, whether we be male or female? Wouldn't it be easier if God made us a bit more like the animals? Wouldn't it be easier if He sort of just toned down that part of our makeup? We have to acknowledge that what God has created is good. That's what He pronounced. That the joining together of man and woman, the creation of man and woman that we read about in creation, is something just wonderful. And that creation ordinance of man and woman joined together becoming one flesh is part of His pre-fall order that we continue to enjoy to this day. I wonder if there are some very, very important life-affirming and life-helping parts of our sexuality. That as we grow up, as we experience that change at puberty, which is so confusing and difficult for so many, actually within that framework we have an opportunity to choose self-control. To say, actually, I can control my body. I can control my desires. We learn at the very core of our humanity, which is sexual, actually there's a part of me which has an opportunity to live as God intended. And within that framework, as we learn and explore that as teenagers, as we grow up as adults, actually that builds into us a degree of self-control which is part of the fruit of the Spirit. Maybe that recognition actually is really difficult to control. I need God's help. Actually, Lord, help me in this area of my sexuality. It's not something we keep divorced and separated, but we join together and say, God, you made me like this. Help me to express my sexuality in a way which honors and glorifies you and the community around us. That I choose not to look at the guys and think of him simply as a stud, or the girls and think them simply as a sexual object. That I value the relationships and the emotional connectivity that comes through seeing that sexuality expressed in emotional connectivity. That I might struggle with that. And let's face it, many of us do, particularly us guys. Lord, help me to learn that language of love, learn that language which connects, that I might honor those who you bring into my presence, that I can connect with them. That rather than giving us a dubbed down or weaker sexual desire, actually that very thing which is innate within us is there to help us to recognize and see something which God has given to us which drives us to Him. And that we don't divorce or separate that, but we incorporate it. Because actually I've got to learn to express myself in a language which takes my heart with a God who loves and cares for me. To actually explore, Lord, I feel really angry about this. And to be able to express that to Him in prayer. And maybe it is because prayer is an emotional connection that so many of us find prayer difficult. So could there be a link between our sexual repression and our lack of prayer? Maybe are these things that we could perhaps join together and make one that would be for our best and our good. So rather than blaming God for giving us this awful feeling and emotion, we rejoice that God has created us, and we explore and think, is there a better way than cheap sexual attraction or cheap sexual fulfillment? That actually I take that which God has given and I build something wonderful through it. Is that a better story? I wish going back I'd been taught better. Maybe I wouldn't have the ears to hear it, I don't know. But I long that we might create a community where this is okay to talk about. That we don't snigger at the word sex. We don't think of it as dirty or difficult or something to be separated, but actually we incorporate it. And that as the church grows, we become an oasis, not a desert. That our relationships express that connection, which is emotional and, yes, where it is appropriate, fulfilled in intimacy. That we might not just talk, but demonstrate. That the love that God has for us, that the people around us might be like these friends who say, eat, oh friends, drink your fill. It's great. Relationship, a bit of a desert. Take these words from the Song of Songs. Guys, think about how could I connect emotionally with my wife? Girls, women, how do I help my men to connect with this? For the single, the widowed. Lord, can I be one of those armed warriors around people? Could I take those steps which helps protect? Daughters of Jerusalem, could I be those that help to build into that relationship something that's wonderful and good? Father, we've come a long way this morning. There's lots there. Just pray that through that work of your Spirit, you take that which is of you and apply it into our hearts and lives. You'd help us not to be just talkers, but those who live out in practical, caring ways some of these things that we've been exploring today. Thank you for your great love for us. Thank you for all that you have made us to be. Amen.